Hi, Chris Duff over at Serious Land Capital, vacant land funding partner. Talking about auctions again today. More updates. I know I was discussing the difficult property in Tennessee that we found out was previously listed twice recently, was not moving, close to the purchase price that we had it at, that we never discovered. I went over that in previous podcasts and how we're exploring doing, we signed up to do an absolute auction where, there's no reserve price, but it typically inspires increased buyer activity. And so I went over some of that process in the previous podcast, but I was chatting with my core business partner yesterday. We had some misalignment, misunderstanding just in terms of a strategy and approach. This was after I already signed the auction document and had already got the termination agreement signed by our existing broker who was listing on MLS. And so again, let this be a lesson. We are not perfect. We try to run things as smoothly as possible. It's just we were trying to make a lot of decisions very quickly with the info that we had to try to solve this problem. Admittedly, in retrospect, before I signed the agreement, I should have been researching a bit more on possible other avenues or like adjustments to an auction process, because my partner's been he's done a lot of auctions, not land necessarily. He's like, dude, there's always a floor, there's always a reserve. Had never heard of an absolute auction before, and it's just the risk of us potentially getting screwed on a really low bid. If that was the case, like that's just a massive loss that we would have to eat. Or there was the risk of, it could be an insider job. If the auctioneer running the process was not the most reputable, he could, I'm just hypothetically saying this here and eyes wide open, worst case scenario, kind of get his buddy involved, buy us out for a really cheap exit price on the deal, and then they go and flip the property as a handshake deal later where you can take home more of the profits. My partner operates in a lot of really difficult corporate restructuring and so forth. Like he's seen that happen before. So his perspective on what, is absolute worst case downside is helpful to keep in mind. At the same time, that would be a huge reputation risk for this auctioneer. And he's not coming from some random place. He works for one of the largest brokerages in central Tennessee that routinely lists and sells multi-8-figure ranches and large estates and so forth, like a really polished group. And admittedly, I should have gone to an LLM model and really downloaded thoughts about and just looked for, hey, what are alternatives? How do I inform myself better? I talk about AI now all the time, and I didn't do that off the bat until I'd already signed the doc. But the AI was also pointing out, hey, is there instead of just doing a reserve, could you do a minimum bid process of, still having the advantages of an absolute auction, meaning a sale is going to be guaranteed so long as a certain threshold passes within the bid process. So, if we were realistic and even, willing to, eat a small loss on the deal, relatively small loss, anything that would surpass that number, let's say 75K in that auction process would then, still be the absolute auction. So we'd still be guaranteed to sell, and just make that publicly available. Whereas, reserve auctions are generally having a private reserve price. Plus I would have just wanted to know, okay, what are some the past data about the auctions? I'd ask for that. Is there any way to get any pre-bid activity, like investors that you routinely share auctions with? Can we get an idea on what numbers they would put in? I should have just been asking some of these questions before. Lesson learned, especially in a new area, something that we've never done before. I just rushed it. So that was our back and forth process. I went back to the auctioneer with all of this, and we chatted this morning. It's like, dude, we signed the contract. You're asking to change the terms. And I'm like, I know it's loose. We're ignorant here. We're naive. admittedly, we're just really concerned we're going to get screwed on this deal. And so I brought up all these things like, well, I mean, legally, ethically, I just can't view, at least within Tennessee law, doing this minimum bid process, like if it's labeled absolute auction, like it has to sell if there's a certain bid in place. Like that's what we are agreed on. He's like, yeah, I can try to get you minimum bids, or pre-bids from his investors group. Said, I think I can get you at least 50K like right off the bat, which would be like over half of what we needed, and just like really trying to push it towards out-of-state buyers who will see such a cheap price per acre and just want to jump on that, even though it's like not the most sexy land. And I really, grilled them on, okay, what's your exact amount of dollars being spent on advertising? It's like $3,500 plus a lot of local signage going up, and then they have the highest signature land.com, landwatch, etc. slots on those sites, and they always prioritize their auction properties as number one. So we're going to be front and center there. They have outstanding drone photographer that it's like best time of year to take better drone photos. And I looked at all their site. Again, their brokerage is very, very solid. So we're going to get improved photos there. And then, I quickly, again, credit to their team. They're very responsive. They got back to me with some of their past auctions they did, all the land ones, including ones within like the last couple weeks, and saw all of the confirmed county official records pricing on it. And some of these were pretty inferior properties, like comparably rough, like the one that we have. And we would have to be by far the worst performer out of all of these auctions that went on within the area. Like we'd have to be like twice as bad as the other worst performers. So like that was more reassuring that, okay, these guys are getting real action on their auctions here. And kind of reassuring us, that there's a better chance for us to get a favorable result just based on, performance of relatively similar assets. Some of them were higher quality, some were pretty rough and still got like very favorable results. So we don't need much from a per acre perspective to at least break even with this asset. So that was really the key thing here. Plus the bids are going to be publicly available in terms of, what's showing up on the website. So we have transparency there assisting us. But yeah, again, in retrospect, I still, even with all this in mind, like instinctually, I think this is still the best pathway for us to mitigate the damage from this property as much as possible. We also went over, our DDQ due diligence questionnaire on what we could have improved and why we wouldn't have pursued this property in the first place. Again, if we knew about the listing history, we just would have been off the table. But even if that wasn't the case, there were other key warning signs that we just wouldn't have done. So again, our process, we're always learning, we're always improving. Every single month, every single deal, we can always get better. And just staying in the game and solving problems, putting out fires as they come up. This is like my number one fire to solve at the moment. That's why I've been talking about it so often here. But again, we could have considered like, our last list price was 190, and even though the previous listings wasn't even selling for 100K, it was like, we've only been on market for 60 days. Like, should we just have tried dropping the price by like 100K, test it for another month, see if we could have found a buyer, and, try to mitigate the damage compared to like an absolute catastrophic scenario of just getting pennies on the dollar from an auction. But it was like, it's too late. We already signed the termination agreement. We already signed this other doc. Again, we kind of rushed that process, could have had better comms. But that's also something I would have considered in hindsight. But again, even if that, like if we lowered by 100K and accounting for commission, even if we probably wouldn't have sold at list price if I were to guess, just based on the previous listings that went on, like that could have easily been, 20K loss if we, we're going to consider another possible deal on the active listing. But then, yeah, we could have considered doing the auction process after that is as well. And so that was kind of the thought, but we just jumped on the auction instead, which again, looking at these other results, I'm still thinking we're going to get a better result compared to even if we had listed. But it probably would have been more prudent to test a much lower price initially. We wouldn't have been forced to accept anything listing the property for anything that came up. And then, it's always tough with the macro economy. It's like, do I want to fit this auction in before, the possible reciprocal tariffs come back up in early July, but who knows what's going on with that. So you really can't time it from macro. So, that was kind of an internal debate as well. But nevertheless, we're here. We signed the doc. We're going to be live with the auction on May 22nd. But I wanted to share a lot more thoughts on how I would have handled the process differently if I would have just stepped back for a moment and really thought things more through and chatting with my partner a bit more. We probably would have changed our timing and strategy a bit on this. But, here we are, crossing fingers at this point because we are locked and loaded. I will let you all know how it goes. With that, seriousland.capital for any of your funding needs. We've had so many more deals coming in. I'm just trying to get more capital in because there are some very solid deals I would like to take a part of. So hope to see more from you all too. And then Land Daily Diligence Facebook group for zero cost review of your land deals, and landpricer.ai for the most simple and accurate way to price land. Continuing our grind on that. Subscribe and share. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.